This radio here is a Graymark all-band radio from about, it's made in the late 60s into the early 70s, and they were very common among, they were built in school shop class, and it was a 1920s design regenerative radio, the on-off switch, regeneration control, main bands or main tuning, and here was a band spread control. This particular one I built in shop class, and I was fortunate enough to still have it around in my basement. And I had, when I had stopped using it, I had started stripping a little bit for parts. I took this away, but I was able to find this. So I thought it would be an interesting project to rebuild it, bring it back to its the way it looked when I built it in, I believe it was probably 1973, 74. So it's 50 years old. I can't believe it. Anyway, I'll just go over a few of the features of this radio. It uses 3 tubes. Here, a 12 AT7. That's the dual triode. Here is 35 35W4, which is a single, it's a rectifier, and here's the 50C5, which is a pentode, which is basically an audio amplifier. So here you have interchangeable coils. Here's the main tuning capacitor. Underneath is the band spread. Here's the audio output transformer, which matches this pentode tube to this speaker. Now, it's a very simple radio, very simple circuit, which was invented in the 20s, but it got remarkable sensitivity. I used to pick up in the 70s, I used to pick up Europe with this, and I did my all-time distance DX with by picking up India. That was about I think 1975, something like that, when the sunspots were at their best. So when I was looking at this here, I was quite surprised at how good the work I did was. I was pretty good at soldering when I was 13 or 14 years old. Anyway, here's what the circuit looked like. Here's the bottom of the tube sockets, and here's 2 capacitors, which are now probably completely shot. So all that needs to be done down here, all that needs to be done is the band spread capacitors needs to be reinstalled, and everything else is intact. As far as I've lost the dial for that, so I'm going to replace all 3 dials so that they match, and I'm going to put on new feet. I have the bottom, and when I was using this, I found out very quickly that the antenna, which was about a 100-foot antenna, needed to be matched. It worked much better when it was matched, so I built a matching device. So when I do use this again, I'm going to take out that matching device, and that will allow it to be matched for best performance. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to turn the radio on and see what it sounds like. It probably won't work, but let's see. See what comes out of the speaker. Just hum. So I think those 2 electrolytic capacitors will need to be reinstalled to get rid of that. There's really nothing else in this radio that would go faulty. Normally what you do is you tune in whatever station, you turn this so it's squealing, and then you go into the band you wanted, and you'd find a squeal, and then you'd go back on this and you'd hear a voice. This also receives single sideband, so you can hear single sideband by adjusting this, and this is on-off volume. This coil here is the only one I was able to find, so I purchased another coil, and I'm going to rewind one for the medium wave band. But this is how you take it out. Originally I wound 3 coils for this kit. One was for frequencies above 12 megahertz. This coil here is for frequencies of about 3 to 12 megahertz, and then there was one for I think the lower end of the medium wave band up to about 3 megahertz. So this radio covered all the shortwave bands and medium wave, and it was a very good performer on shortwave. As I said earlier, I was able to get India once, and every day I used to get Europe, back when shortwave broadcasting was really big. Today I just want to get it working. There isn't much on shortwave. Radio New Zealand is pretty well the only, well, there are other English broadcasts, but you really have to look around for them. But you can also receive ham on this. A lot of people use the radio like this as their first ham receiver, because these receive single sideband and AM. So anyway, I'm going to, it needs repainting here. So I'm going to completely strip the radio down, take all the tubes, sockets and everything out of it, separate these two, and I've got the right color paint for this, so I'm going to repaint all this. Then I'll replace those 2 electrolytic capacitors, and then we'll get it all looking nice, and we'll try it and see what we can get. So now I'll start taking it apart and get it ready for sanding. Should be very careful taking tubes off, as they're very delicate, especially these smaller tubes. Gently rock them. Use 2 hands and just gently pry them out. I'll take this transformer out next. Just loosen them off. I'm just going to loosen all the screws off for now, because they've got nuts on the bottom. I'm going to have to unsolder this transformer from the speaker so I can separate these. Just down here, I'll start taking these off here. Not as easy as I thought it would be. So I've got this one off here. The dials are off. Now I'll just take this wrench and loosen the last one off. There we are. Now these in no problem. And I'll have to remove these two screws here so the speaker can come off. And hold the nut down there. From there. And take the other one here off. With my finger up behind holding the nut. So that comes off. And there we are. Now this is all will come apart. The speaker's just sitting there quite vulnerable, so I'll unsolder the speaker. I think what I'll do is I'll just take the nuts out that hold the transformer in place. And just take the transformer out, and then all I have to do is unsolder the transformer from the output tube. So here I'm going to unsolder the transformer, the auto transformer, there, and the other one is, where is it here, kind of hidden away underneath, right there. Yeah, I think that better be cut off. Some side cutters. Right there. Now I can take the speaker and the transformer out. There we are. There's another screw that I don't want that to go missing. There's another one. Now here we've got a couple of screws, heavier screws, that hold in the variable capacitor. Let's see if I can get that in there. No, it's too wide. So I'm going to have to use the smaller one here. Kind of weird. That is a weird one. Gonna have to figure that one out. It's a very, very shallow slot screw. After a lot of work, I got that screw out. Boy, it's a very, very, very shallow screw. Either I'll replace it, or I will take a hacksaw and cut into it and make it a deeper channel there. Amazing I was able to get that in when I was a kid. I'm going to have to take off the leads that go to the variable capacitor. So let's unsolder those. They're not coming off easy. Here we have the first coat on the radio cabinet. Looks pretty good. The color's a little bit different from what I thought it would be, but it's still a nice green color, fairly close to what the original one was. It doesn't really matter, a perfect match. As long as it looks uniform, I'm not too fussy. Anyway, we'll leave this overnight and then do the other side of the base. As you can see, the base on right behind, it's I've done one side and I'm going to do the other side. Here I'm going to go over this circuit a little bit and just explain how it works. This circuit is a very basic circuit. It's called a regenerative radio, and how it works is you've got these three coils. They're all on the same coil form. This point is connected to the antenna, and the signal comes in and is coupled through this capacitor C10 to this coil here. This capacitor inductively couples the antenna currents into this L2 circuit, which is the tune circuit. This capacitor, variable capacitor, resonates with L2 and it will give you the frequency that you want to tune into. So if you want to tune into, let's say, AM 1000, and this you have the medium wave coil in, this will tune into it. These two are your fine tuning, and that just gives you a band spread, a little fine tuning, so you can tune in the station. Here, this is your amplifying tube, and this here this is called your tickler coil. Now, when you turn on the radio, a current flows through here, and it a little bit of the signal is fed back. Now, you can adjust this to oscillate, or you can back it off just to the point before oscillation. Then you retune it, and you tune in a squeal. You back this off a little more, and then you'll hear a voice or music or whatever it is you're tuning into, or a single sideband signal. That is the point of maximum amplification for this tube. An amplifier just before oscillation can amplify as much as 1,000,000 times. So at that point, you take the audio signal and it goes through here. Now, this is a buffer amplifier, and it keeps this part from loading down the oscillator. An oscillator is very sensitive to being loaded down. If it's loaded down by a low impedance, it can change frequency or it can stop oscillating altogether. So this is the second part of the B3, the 12AT7 tube, and it buffers the two stages. The signal, the audio signal, is passed on to the 50C5, where it's the audio amplifier, and this is amplified a tremendous amount. Now, this, by looking at the circuit, I'm not too sure, but it probably detects too. This probably is biased, so it will detect the signal, detect and amplify. So then the audio signal is taken off the plate of the 50C5 pentode, which is a high impedance, and you have a high impedance coil on the transformer and a low impedance coil which matches the loudspeaker, 8 ohms. So that is the whole radio in a nutshell. The only additional circuit we have here is the power supply. 120 volts comes in here. Here's your on-off switch. This tube turns AC to DC. It's a half-wave rectifier. These two resistors and these two capacitors act as a filter. So they take the pulsating DC and they fill, the capacitors act as reservoir capacitors,
and these smooth out the variations, and you'll get a smooth DC here. You get a higher voltage smooth DC, which feeds the plate of this this tube here, and here you have a lower voltage DC, which feeds the other tubes, but also feeds this screen grid of the pentode. Now here you have a series string, the 35W4 tube, the 50C5 and 12AT7 add up to plus this here, the voltage drop here, so they all add up to 115 volts. And this is the arrangement that most post-war tube receivers had. The common All-American 5 uses a bunch of tubes that all add up to 117 or 115 volts. So this capacitor here simply makes the chassis a common ground. So it's your, that just makes, is your B minus, called B minus, but this part is your B minus, but the actual chassis is at AC ground. So that's what this capacitor does. So that is the whole explanation of how this circuit works. It's a very crude 1920s design, but when it's matched to an antenna, it is a very amazing radio to play with. As I said earlier in the video, I did my all-time DX record for myself back in the 70s, and I picked up all India radio. I just couldn't believe it when I picked up India, because that's 10,000 miles from where I live. So anyway, we'll be reassembling the radio in the next part of the video, and we will do it bit by bit.
Okay, so here we're going to put this, I don't know if it should go that way or that way. I'll put it this way. I'm going to use a rather big crescent wrench for this, but that's what I have on hand. There we are. That's in nice and tight. Okay, so that is the main variable capacitor installed, and the fine tuning. Here's the wiring harness, and I'll just put this in from the opposite side and put the potentiometer and two potentiometers in. Now look for the mounting hardware. Here we have the mounting hardware. And I just want the potentiometer to be on the side there. So put the nuts on, two potentiometers, loosely at first, so I get them aligned. Naturally, one doesn't want to bite. Take the other one off, try it on there. And that one seems to bite on that one okay. Now see if this one bites on here. Yeah, it's threading. Seems to be okay. And that one there. And I want to tighten it down so it sits in there nicely. Get the oversized crescent wrench. And then okay, scraped off a bit of paint, but that's can't be avoided. See if they turn okay. Yeah. And then that one back and forth, no problem. Okay. The next thing on the agenda is to put in the two grommets, which are still very flexible considering they're 70 years old, a bit over 50 years old. Usually grommets start to harden, but maybe those are made with plastic, unlike the older ones which are made of rubber. These I think are made of some kind of plastic rubber probably. Now, the smallest one is most difficult to put in, naturally. Should do it from below. I don't scrape the paint. Doesn't look very good, kind of distorted, but just put the screwdriver in here and just kind of push it around. No, should be okay. And there's the back one for the power cord. Now I'm going to start mounting the tube sockets. So there I've got the first tube socket. Okay, so hold the bottom and tighten this down. Hold the nut on the bottom. There we are. Then this one. This paint is not really set for some reason. It seems to scrape very easily. It's been a number of days since I painted this. There we are, that first one is in. So maybe I'll put the big one in next. Okay, so here we've got the screws in. I'm just going to tighten them down on the coil form socket. Let's see here. Need to get a better grip on that one. Yeah. So now we have this in tight. There we are. So the next thing we're going to do is this one here. So here we have to tighten down this one here, and see if I can get my finger in the back there. It's a very tight, small fit. There we are. Tighten that down. There we are. Give that other one a little tighten. And now the final tube socket. Here we are. So I've got the screws in for the final socket. Let's see if I can grab it underneath. There. Now this other one, which is almost impossible to get my finger to hold. My finger in there. And there, now all the sockets are in. Now, what I'm going to have to do is start, I guess, put the speaker in and mount the transformer. So in order for the speaker to go in easier and separate from the transformer, because when you put the transformer in, I mean the speaker in, it you have to put the front on at the same time. So I'm going to separate the audio transformer and the speaker. I'm going to unsolder this here. There we are. And there. So here I put the transformer screws in, and now I'll just tighten them down. The other one's a little tight, so I'm going to have to tighten that with a pair of pliers. After I had mounted the audio transformer on the radio chassis, I thought I would just check for continuity of the leads, and I found that the black and green wires, continuity is broken. So I went in and I knew that it was probably the wires because the inside coil was working. It was working before I started dismantling the radio, so I figured maybe one of the lead-in wires was crooked, so broken I should say. And so I just opened it up, and I'm checking the continuity here, and the actual coil itself, transformer winding, is fine. I've got 1.1 ohms. So the problem is on one of the wires. So let's see which wire is broken here. It looks like the black wire has a break in it. So I'll just replace it. Let me just double check this green wire here. The green wire is fine. So I'll just replace that black wire and reseal the transformer. I'll just put a new black wire in here. To keep the transformer authentic looking after I put a new wire on it, because I'd cut the tape holding it all in, I put a I glued them all together, but I put a piece of paper on there and glued it, and I'm just going to take a bit of acrylic paint and paint it red. Paint the piece of paper red with a screwdriver. Then it'll have an authentic look. Won't look like so much like it's been worked on. There we are. There, at least it looks like the original tape. And also acrylic tape, or I mean acrylic paint, it gets hard, so it's more like kind of like glue in a sense. And it dries very quick. So there we have a pretty authentic looking job. While the paint on the transformer is drying, I'm going to mount this little antenna terminal. So it has a couple of fiber washers, so should go in with the first fiber washer, and it's going to be difficult to put in. After struggling for quite some time with that little, see the bottom of that antenna terminal there, I'm going to solder or resolder the little capacitor, the antenna capacitor that couples the antenna signal into the main coil. There we are. The antenna terminal has, once it's tightened, the top piece here, you can stick a wire in there, or just an alligator clip or whatever, and then tighten it down. So here we have two wires that have been disconnected, and let's see where they go. So this one, which is on pin 4 of the, I guess pin 4 of the coil form, that's that wire, so that goes to there, which is the fine tuning, and then the next one goes to the main variable capacitor. On the fine tuning capacitor, I had to use a solder sucker to get the last bit of solder out of the terminal. So now I'll solder the wire on. Put a bit of a loop in that. Squeeze it down. And then solder it. There, it looks good. And I also did the one down there, as you can see. So both the main and fine tuning capacitors are wired into the circuit. So what I've done here is I've mounted the tie points
These where the wires come together, and they're insulated from the chassis. It's like a phenolic fiber board tie-in points, and there's one over here, you can't really see it, and that's where the wires are tied in. And the next thing I'm going to do is, I think I will test and see how the transformer is, if it's dry yet. In order to mount the front board, I had to take all the mounting hardware off and put them on the outside of the green front piece. Now I'm going to install the loudspeaker. So here I mounted the loudspeaker. It goes in with, back there's 2 screws, and they go in through the front here, 2 machine screws. So now we have most of the components back in, and I think next I'll probably wire the cord in. Now here we're going to install the transformer and solder it in. There we are. And there. Now I'm going to solder on the low impedance windings. One I'll have to shorten a bit. Tin the wire. And put it onto, solder it onto the speaker there. Hold it. Whoops. Doesn't want to, didn't harden there. Leave it a little longer. Once it stops bubbling, and then tin the second one. There. And that's done. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to thread the primary winding. Have to put them through the grommet. And solder them onto the terminals that it's supposed to hook up to. So here I'm connecting, here we're soldering one side of the primary to pin 7 of the output tube, and here we are soldering the other side to the B+. Okay, so here I've taken the power cord through the grommet, and I'm just going to tie 2 knots here. These are called underwriters knots, and that's just to keep the power cord in place so they don't slip out. There.
That keeps everything in place. And this one is going to go to the main power switch. Put a bit of solder on there, and then take one side of melt them together and hold it in place for 30 seconds. And that should be okay. So here I've soldered one side of the power cord on, and the other side goes to pin 5 of the 35W4 tube. Now the only thing I have to do is I'm going to solder new capacitors across these old capacitors, and that should get rid of the hum. I'm not going to remove the old capacitors, I'm just going to leave them in there for show. So here I've put in 2 capacitors, one underneath it there, and they'll take up the slack. These are the original capacitors. I'm leaving them in just for show, and these 2 new capacitors should do the trick. They're just in parallel with them. These old capacitors are just the values have gone so low that they can't filter, do the proper job of filtering the pulsating DC anymore. So now I'm going to put the tubes in and see how this works. So I've turned the radio on. All the tubes are in, the coil's in, and the hum is quieter, but there should be regeneration. When I turn this up, there should be a hissing sound, and so I'm going to have to figure out why I'm not getting hissing sound. The output amplifier seems to be working. That tube seems to be a little bit noisy, but seems to be a problem with the 12AT7. So I'm going to have to test those tubes and see if they're all okay. The rectifier is working okay. The 2B plus voltages are fine, but there seems to be a very low signal when I put just by touching the input of the 12AT7. There seems to be a problem there, and it's not breaking into oscillation. So I'll just go over the schematic and do some more checking. Other than that, at least most of it's working. So I was looking through the schematic and comparing it to the wiring, and I realized that this connection from here to here I hadn't made. So this is basically connecting pin 4 from the coil to I had already made that connection, pin 4 to the band spread, but from the band spread to the variable capacitor was broken. So I made that connection, and then the radio springed into life. You can see here that red wire that goes from the band spread down to the variable capacitor there. That's what was missing. I had clipped that, and inadvertently I had to put it back. So now it works fine. So I'll just demonstrate how this radio works now. I've got a signal generator putting a 6 megahertz signal. First I had to determine this coil, what the frequency range was. I had a general idea, but I tried it the night before, and I hooked it up to a small antenna, and I was getting quite a few shortwave stations. mainly from the Far East because it was in the middle of the night and I'm on the west coast of North America. So the radio stations in the Far East are the most common here late at night. So anyway, because there's no radio stations on from 6 megahertz to 10 megahertz in the middle of the day, at least in this area, I will show how this radio works with a signal generator. So the signal generator is tuned to 6 megahertz. So at the low end there, I'm getting 6 megahertz. So in order to get this tuned into a station, you turn it into oscillation like that. And normally, say it's just a straight carrier, you turn this into oscillation right on where it breaks. This is a regeneration control, and use the band spread to look for stations. So when you get something that's squealing like that, you back off the regeneration, and there you are. There you just got a carrier, but I'll put on the modulation and you can hear it fine. So if this was a radio station, you'd hear it nice and clear. Now I'm going to go to the other extreme, 10 megahertz. So I'll take this to the other end, turn this up. Not as strong. Turn that a little more sensitive. So the whole point of this is to put the regeneration control up just before it starts to oscillate, back off, and that's the point of maximum sensitivity. And it is as, I would say this is as sensitive as any shortwave radio out there with just a whip. If you put this onto a 100-foot antenna and a matching device, you can get incredible sensitivity. Now I'll just go to 9 megahertz. I'm going to back that off. There's 9 megahertz. 8 megahertz. 7 megahertz. It seems to be very sensitive down in the 6 to 7 megahertz range, which is probably due to the antenna characteristics I'm using. I'm just using a 4-foot length of, maybe a 5-foot length of alligator clip connected to a piece of metal, and working quite well. So this radio is now working, and I don't have let's show you. Here's the matching device that I used to use to match it to a 100-foot antenna, all homemade, of course. I'll show you what it looks like inside. The matching device basically had a series of switches which switched in capacitors, 2 variable capacitors, and this would be adjusted until you get the most sensitive match, this and this, and then you tune in the capacitors to get a good match. So this is what it looks like inside. Not much of a thing of beauty, but it worked very well. 2 capacitors, 2 variable capacitors, a bunch of switching bunch of capacitors that you switch in and out, hand wound coil, and a fairly complicated rotary switch. I've forgotten how this was hooked up, so I'm going to have to go through this and figure it out. Haven't used this probably since I was a teenager, but I remember it was very effective. Anyway, that's what it looks like, and this radio is working. So it'll go on to another project.